The science vessel Meridian drifted through the cold darkness of the Kepler 442 system on a routine survey mission. Commander Daniel Ortiz stood on the bridge and watched the stars through the main viewport. His crew of 847 souls had been out here for 3 months now, mapping asteroid fields and scanning planets for mineral deposits. It was quiet work, and Ortiz liked it that way. The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across 12 star systems. The United Earth Coalition governed from Earth and maintained peace among the colonies. There had been no major conflicts in over 60 years. Humanity had grown comfortable in its little corner of the galaxy. That comfort ended at exactly 0347 hours when the sensor officer shouted a warning. Something had appeared on their screens. It was small at first, just a blip among the asteroids. Then more blips appeared. Then hundreds more. Ortiz felt his stomach drop as the display filled with unknown contacts. The alien probe reached them first. It was black and angular, covered in symbols that no human had ever seen. It circled the Meridian twice before transmitting a signal. The ship's computer struggled to translate the alien language but eventually pieced together enough to understand. The probe was asking questions. What species were they? Where did they come from? How many worlds did they control? Ortiz ordered his communications officer to respond peacefully. They were explorers, he said. They meant no harm. They came in peace and wished only friendship. The response came not from the probe, but from the massive fleet that now surrounded them. There were over 300 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They were dark red and covered in spines and weapons. They looked like instruments of war because that was exactly what they were. The alien commander spoke through the translator. His name was High Commander Kethrol, and he represented the Vectari Dominion. The Dominion had conquered over 200 worlds across 3 galaxies. They viewed expansion as their sacred duty, and lesser species as resources to be used. Kethrol delivered his ultimatum in a voice that held no emotion. Humanity had 30 standard days to surrender all territories. All humans would submit to genetic cataloging. All humans would accept their new role as slaves of the Dominion. Refusal meant complete extinction. Ortiz listened to these words and felt something he had never felt before. It was not fear, though fear was certainly there. It was anger, pure and absolute anger at the arrogance of these creatures who thought they could enslave his entire species. He kept his voice calm as he responded. He told Kethrol that humanity would need time to consider. He asked for more information about the Dominion and their culture. He was stalling, and he knew that Kethrol knew it too, but stalling was all he could do. While he talked, his communications officer was transmitting everything back to Earth. Every word, every image, every scan of the alien fleet. If the Meridian was going to die here, at least humanity would know what killed them. The transmission completed at 0412 hours. Ortiz saw the confirmation light blink green and allowed himself a small smile. Kethrol saw that smile and understood its meaning. The alien commander did not waste time with questions or accusations. He simply gave the order. The Meridian died in fire. 300 alien weapons fired at once, and the science vessel ceased to exist in less than a second. Commander Daniel Ortiz and his crew of 847 became the first casualties of a war that would reshape the galaxy. The message reached Earth 6 hours later. Admiral Catherine Ellis was 58 years old and had served in the Coalition Navy for 35 of those years. She had fought in the Mars Rebellion and commanded the defense of Titan Station. She had seen combat and death and had made peace with both, but nothing had prepared her for this. She watched the recording of the Meridian's final moments in silence. She listened to the alien ultimatum and studied the scans of their fleet. When it was over, she turned to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Samuel Price, and asked for his assessment. Price was young but brilliant. He had spent years studying military history and strategy. He looked at the data and delivered his analysis without emotion. The Vectari had superior technology. Their ships were larger and more powerful. Their fleet outnumbered the coalition navy by at least 5-1. Ellis nodded and asked what he recommended. Price was quiet for a moment. Then, he said that superior technology and numbers did not guarantee victory. History was full of examples where smaller forces had defeated larger ones through superior tactics and determination. The key was to refuse to fight on the enemy's terms. Ellis smiled at this. It was exactly what she had been thinking. The emergency session of the Coalition Senate convened within hours. Representatives from all 12 colony worlds gathered to hear the news. President Nathan Cole stood before them and played the recording of the alien ultimatum. The chamber fell silent. Cole was not a military man, but he understood what was at stake. These aliens had murdered over 800 innocent people. They had demanded that humanity submit to slavery. They expected humans to bow down in fear. Cole had no intention of bowing. He addressed the Senate in a voice that carried across the chamber and across every broadcast channel to every human world. He did not plead or negotiate or show fear. He simply spoke the truth. They have drawn first blood, he said. They have murdered our people. They believe us weak because we sought peace. They will learn what humanity does to those who threaten our children. The vote was unanimous. Every representative from every world raised their hand in favor of war. Across the 12 systems, the word spread. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels switched to warships. Factories that had been producing consumer goods began manufacturing weapons. Citizens who had never held a gun downloaded combat training protocols to their neural implants. The Vekthari had given humanity 30 days to surrender. They would use every single one of those days to prepare. Admiral Ellis stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Resolute Dawn, and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vekthari were waiting. They expected fear and submission. They expected humanity to break. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The war had begun, and humanity intended to finish it. Part 2. The Doctrine of Overwhelming Response. 3 weeks passed, and the Vekthari received only silence from humanity. High Commander Kethral waited in his command chamber aboard the Dominion flagship and grew more impatient with each passing day. He had conquered dozens of species, and every single one had begged for mercy within days of receiving his ultimatum. These humans were either very brave or very stupid. Kethral decided they were stupid. He ordered his fleet to attack the human colony world called New Providence. It was home to 4 million civilians, including many children. Kethral intended to make an example of them. He would burn the colony to ash and broadcast the destruction to every human world. That would teach them to fear the Dominion. His strike force of 60 warships entered the New Providence system, expecting easy prey. They found Admiral Catherine Ellis waiting for them. The human fleet numbered only 20 ships. They were smaller than the Vekthari vessels and less heavily armed. By every reasonable calculation, the Vekthari should have destroyed them within minutes. The battle began at dawn, local time. Kethral ordered his ships to advance in their standard formation. It was the same formation the Dominion had used for 3,000 years. It had never failed them because no species had ever found a way to counter it. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Price had found a way. The human ships did not advance to meet the enemy. Instead, they scattered in all directions, presenting no unified target. Kethral sneered at what he thought was cowardice and ordered his ships to pursue. That was his first mistake. As the Vekthari fleet spread out to chase the fleeing humans, something emerged from the asteroid field behind them. Thousands of small objects, each no larger than a man, accelerated toward the alien ships. They were drones, autonomous weapons platforms carrying nuclear warheads. The Vekthari detected them too late. 43 ships died in the first wave. Nuclear fire blossomed across the formation as drone after drone found its target. The explosions were silent in the vacuum of space, but the destruction was absolute. Kethral screamed orders to his remaining captains. He demanded they regroup and concentrate fire on the drones. But the human fleet had stopped running. They turned and advanced, their weapons blazing. The battle became a slaughter. Human ships darted through the chaos with a speed and agility the Vecthari could not match. They fired their weapons and then disappeared before the enemy could respond. More drones emerged from hidden positions, striking at damaged ships and finishing them off. Commander Price coordinated the attack from the bridge of the Resolute Dawn. He watched the tactical display and issued orders with cold precision. Every move the Vecthari made, he had anticipated. Every tactic they tried, he had a counter. The aliens were not just losing, they were being systematically destroyed. After 6 hours of fighting, only 17 Vecthari ships remained. Their commander ordered a retreat, activating their fold drives to escape to safety. Admiral Ellis did not allow it. She had positioned a second group of ships along the most likely retreat vectors. As the surviving Vecthari tried to flee, they found themselves under attack once again. One by one, the alien ships were hunted down and destroyed. Not a single Vecthari vessel escaped. The Battle of New Providence was over. The colony was safe. 4 million human lives had been saved by the sacrifice and skill of their defenders. On Earth, President Cole addressed the coalition. He announced the victory and praised the courage of Admiral Ellis and her fleet. But he also warned that this was only the beginning. The Vecthari would return with more ships and more determination. Humanity had to be ready. Dr. Linda Vasquez, head of Coalition Intelligence, presented her findings to the military council. Her teams had been studying the wreckage of the destroyed Vecthari ships and had made several important discoveries. The alien technology was indeed superior in many ways. Their shields were stronger, their weapons more powerful, their ships more durable. But their tactics were rigid and predictable. They fought the same way they had always fought because it had always worked before. They had never faced an enemy that refused to play by their rules. Vasquez also revealed that her cryptographers had begun cracking the Vecthari communications codes. Partial translations suggested that the Dominion was shocked by the defeat. They had expected easy victory, and instead had lost an entire fleet. General Marcus Webb, commander of the Coalition ground forces, spoke next. He argued that the war could not be won through defense alone. Eventually, humanity would need to take the fight to the enemy. His soldiers were already training for ground combat against the Vecthari. Admiral Ellis agreed but cautioned patience. They needed more information about the enemy before launching an offensive. They needed to understand how the Dominion thought and how they could be beaten. In the Dominion capital, High Commander Kethral stood before the ruling council and delivered his report. He did not try to hide the extent of the defeat. 60 ships had been lost. Thousands of Vecthari warriors had died. The humans had fought with tactics the Dominion had never encountered. The council members listened in stunned silence. For 3,000 years, the Dominion had known only victory. Conquered species either surrendered or were exterminated. None had ever inflicted such losses on a Vecthari fleet. One council member asked how this was possible. Kethral had no good answer. The humans were supposed to be weak. Their technology was inferior. They should have been easy prey. Instead, they had proven to be something the Dominion had not faced in millennia, a species that knew how to fight. Kethral demanded total mobilization. The Dominion would commit every available ship to this war. They would crush humanity with overwhelming numbers and firepower. There would be no more small fleets and limited engagements. This would be total war. The council voted in agreement. Across Dominion space, shipyards accelerated production. Reserve fleets were activated. Warriors who had not seen combat in generations prepared for battle. The Vecthari were coming. All of them. Back on the Resolute Dawn, Admiral Ellis received the intelligence reports about the Dominion mobilization. She had expected this. Victory at New Providence had been necessary, but it had also awakened a sleeping giant. She called Commander Price to her ready room and asked for his assessment. Price studied the numbers and gave his honest opinion. The Vecthari would send thousands of ships. Humanity could not match those numbers. But numbers alone did not win wars. What mattered was how those numbers were used. Ellis nodded. She had fought outnumbered before. She had won before. The question was whether humanity could keep winning long enough to find a way to end the war permanently. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere out there, a vast armada was gathering. The real war was about to begin. 8 months had passed since the war began, and humanity was losing. The Vecthari armada had arrived with over 2,000 warships. They swept through human space like a tide of fire, destroying everything in their path. 3 colony worlds had fallen. 17 million people were dead. Admiral Ellis commanded a fighting retreat across the stars. She refused to engage the main enemy fleet directly, because that would mean certain destruction. Instead, she traded space for time, falling back system by system while making the Vecthari pay for every light year they advanced. Her tactics were brutal and effective. Small strike teams boarded enemy vessels under cover of darkness, planted explosives, and escaped before the ships tore themselves apart. Asteroid fields were seeded with mines that destroyed supply convoys. Communications were hacked to send false orders that caused friendly fire incidents among the alien fleet. Every trick humanity could devise was used against the invaders, but it was not enough. The colony world of New Helsinki fell on a Tuesday morning. The Vecthari landed ground forces and began rounding up survivors for execution. They had abandoned any pretense of taking humans as slaves. Their new orders were simple: kill them all. A woman named Maria Santos refused to die. She had been a schoolteacher before the war. Her classroom had held 30 children who trusted her to keep them safe. When the Vecthari bombed the school, 23 of those children died instantly. The others died in the fires that followed. Maria survived because she had stepped outside for just a moment. She watched her school burn, and something inside her changed forever. She gathered other survivors in the ruins of the city. Former soldiers, factory workers, parents who had lost their children. They had no weapons except what they could steal, and no training except what they could teach each other. The new Helsinki resistance was born. Maria organized her people into cells that operated independently. If one cell was captured, it could not betray the others. They sabotaged Vecthari equipment, assassinated officers, and freed prisoners from execution camps. When the aliens tried to round up humans for mass killings, they found empty buildings and deadly traps. Streets that should have been safe exploded without warning. Officers who walked alone at night never returned. The Vecthari garrison commander reported to his superiors that the humans were like ghosts. They appeared from nowhere, struck without mercy, and vanished before retaliation was possible. For every one his soldiers killed, 2 more seemed to take their place. Maria Santos became a legend among the occupied colonies. Stories spread of the schoolteacher who had become a warrior. Her name was whispered in the darkness as a symbol of hope. In space, the war continued. A young pilot named Christopher Hayes had joined the fight 6 months earlier. He had been a cargo hauler before the war, flying supply runs between colony worlds. Now he flew a fighter craft and killed Vecthari for a living. Hayes was good at his job, very good. His kill count reached 47 confirmed enemy ships within his first 4 months of combat. Other pilots called him lucky, but Hayes knew the truth. It was not luck that kept him alive. It was cold calculation and absolute focus. He did not hate the Vecthari. Hate was too emotional, too distracting. He simply destroyed them because they needed to be destroyed. It was mathematics, not passion. Admiral Ellis promoted him to squadron leader and gave him the most dangerous missions. Hayes accepted without complaint. Someone had to do the work. The turning point came in the 9th month of the war. Dr. Vasquez's intelligence teams had been working non-stop to crack the Vecthari strategic database. They had captured computer cores from destroyed ships and spent months breaking through layers of encryption. Finally, they succeeded. What they found changed everything. The Vecthari had conquered over 200 species across 3 galaxies. This was known. What was not known was how they had done it. Every single species had surrendered. The Dominion's entire military doctrine was built around quick conquests. They would arrive with overwhelming force, issue their ultimatum, and wait for submission. When submission came, they would enslave the population and move on to the next target. Their logistics, their supply chains, their entire way of war was designed for this pattern. They had never fought a prolonged conflict. They did not know how. Their shipyards could build new vessels but not fast enough to replace losses from extended combat. Their warriors were brave, but had no experience with real resistance. Their commanders knew only one strategy because one strategy had always been enough. Humanity was bleeding them dry. More importantly, the database contained something else: coordinates, star charts, navigation data, the location of the Vekthari homeworld. Admiral Ellis studied this information in the quiet of her ready room. For months, she had fought a defensive war, retreating and surviving and hoping for some opportunity to strike back. Now that opportunity had arrived. She called her senior officers together and presented her plan. It was audacious, beyond anything they had attempted. It was also potentially suicidal. While a decoy fleet drew the main Vekthari armada toward Earth, a strike force would punch through enemy lines and make directly for the Dominion homeworld. They would destroy every military target along the way. They would burn a path through Vekthari space that the aliens would never forget. And when they reached the homeworld, they would end the war. Commander Price asked how many ships they would need. Ellis told him she was taking everything they could spare. 300 warships, 2,000 drone carriers, 50 troop transports carrying General Webb's ground forces. It would leave Earth and the remaining colonies nearly defenseless. If the strike failed, humanity would be doomed. But if they did nothing, humanity was doomed anyway. The Vekthari would eventually grind them down through sheer numbers. This was their only chance. President Cole listened to the plan and asked only one question. Could it work? Ellis looked him in the eye and told the truth. She did not know. But it was the best option they had. Cole was silent for a long moment. Then he gave his approval. Operation Burning Sky was authorized. On New Helsinki, Maria Santos received the coded message from Coalition Command. Help was coming. They just had to hold on a little longer. She gathered her resistance fighters and told them the news. For the first time in months, she saw hope in their eyes. The long night was almost over. Dawn was approaching. Part 4. Operation Burning Sky. The fleet gathered in the shadow of Neptune, where Vekthari sensors could not reach. 300 warships arranged themselves in battle formation, while crews made final preparations. 2,000 drone carriers loaded their deadly cargo. 50 troop transports held General Webb's soldiers, men and women who knew they might never see home again. Admiral Ellis stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn and watched the fleet assemble. 14 months ago, she had commanded the defense of New Providence with 20 ships. Now she would lead the largest offensive operation in human history. Commander Price stood beside her, reviewing tactical data on his display. He had aged in the past year. They all had. But his mind was as sharp as ever, and his calculations gave them a chance of success. Not a large chance, but a chance. The decoy fleet departed first, heading toward Earth with enough ships to be convincing. Their job was to draw the main Vekthari armada away from the strike zone. Many of those ships would not survive. Their crews knew this and went anyway. 12 hours later, the strike force moved out. The breakthrough point was a gap in the Vekthari patrol lines near the edge of human space. Intelligence suggested it was lightly defended because the aliens did not expect an attack in that direction. They expected humanity to defend, not to strike. They were wrong. The first Vekthari patrol encountered the human fleet at 0600 hours. There were 12 enemy ships, scout vessels designed for observation rather than combat. They transmitted a warning to their command before the humans destroyed them. Ellis had expected this. She pushed the fleet forward at maximum speed, racing to clear the area before reinforcements arrived. The element of surprise was everything now. More enemy ships appeared over the following hours. Small groups sent to investigate the reported contact. Each group was destroyed before it could provide accurate information about the size of the human force. Commander Price coordinated these engagements with cold efficiency. He positioned ships to intercept the enemy before they could escape. He used drones to overwhelm defenses and create openings for the main guns. He wasted nothing and missed nothing. By the end of the first day, the strike force had penetrated deep into Vectari territory. Behind them lay the wreckage of 40 enemy vessels. Ahead lay 1,000 light-years of hostile space. The journey to Vectari Prime would take 6 weeks. Ellis did not waste those weeks. Every military installation along their path was destroyed. Shipyards that built warships were reduced to rubble. Supply depots that fed the Dominion's armies were burned to ash. Communications relays that coordinated enemy movements were torn apart. The humans left nothing behind that could threaten them later. Christopher Hayes and his squadron flew constant patrols around the fleet. Enemy fighters appeared with increasing frequency as word of the invasion spread. Hayes met them without hesitation, his weapons finding their targets with mechanical precision. He lost pilots, good people who had trusted him to lead them. He memorized their names and added them to the list he carried in his heart. The list of reasons why this mission had to succeed. On the 20th day, a Vec-3 battle group of 80 ships attempted to intercept the human fleet. They had been pulled from garrison duty on a conquered world, and their crews were inexperienced. It did not matter. 80 ships were still a serious threat. The battle lasted 9 hours. Human losses were significant. 12 warships destroyed, another 20 damaged. But the Vectari battle group was annihilated completely. Ellis did not slow down. She could not afford to slow down. Every day brought more enemy ships toward her position. Speed was survival. On the 37th day, the strike force entered the Vectari home system. High Commander Kethril was waiting for them. He had gathered every ship that remained to defend the homeworld. 400 warships formed a defensive sphere around Vectari Prime. They were the last line of defense for 8 billion aliens who had never known invasion. Kethril studied the approaching human fleet and felt something he had not experienced in his entire life. Uncertainty. The humans should have been destroyed months ago. They should have surrendered when given the chance. They should not be here, threatening everything the Dominion had built. Yet here they were. He opened communications and offered terms. If the humans retreated now, he would let them go. He would withdraw Dominion forces from their space. He would accept peace. Admiral Ellis listened to his offer and gave her response. No. The Battle of Vectari Prime began at noon, local time. The human fleet advanced in a formation that Price had designed specifically for this engagement. It was dense at the center and loose at the edges, designed to absorb enemy fire while allowing their drones to maneuver. Kethril sent his ships forward to meet them. The two fleets collided in a storm of weapons, fire, and explosions. Ships died on both sides as the battle lines merged into chaos. Ellis commanded from the center of the formation, directing her captains with calm precision. She had fought 100 battles in her career, and this was the largest by far. It was also the most important. Everything depended on what happened in the next few hours. Price handled the tactical details, adjusting formations and identifying weak points in the enemy line. His mind processed information faster than anyone else on the bridge. He saw patterns where others saw only chaos. The drones made the difference. Thousands of them swarmed through the battle, overwhelming Vectari point defense systems. They crashed into enemy ships and detonated their payloads. They clogged sensor systems and created blind spots that human warships exploited. After 6 hours, the Vectari formation began to break. Ships that had been covering each other found themselves isolated and vulnerable. Human vessels hunted them down in packs, concentrating fire until each target was destroyed. Kethril watched his fleet dying and ordered a retreat to closer defensive positions. It was a mistake. The movement created gaps that the humans immediately exploited. After 12 hours, Half the Vecthari fleet was gone. After 18 hours, it was over. Only 63 human ships remained operational. Many were damaged, some severely. But they had won. The Vecthari fleet existed only as debris drifting in the void. High Commander Kethral's flagship was among the wreckage. His body was never recovered. Admiral Ellis looked at the planet below. 8 billion Vecthari waited there, defenseless. Their entire military had been destroyed. Their leadership was dead. They had nothing left to fight with. General Webb's transports began their descent toward the surface. Ellis watched them go and felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion and a grim determination to finish what they had started. The space battle was over. The ground war was about to begin. Part 5. The silence after. The transports descended through clouds of smoke and ash. Below them, the capital city of Kethvar stretched across the horizon. 8 million Vecthari lived in that city, more than the entire population of some human colonies. They looked up at the human ships and knew that everything was about to change. General Webb commanded the landing from the first transport down. His soldiers spread out across the landing zone with practiced efficiency. They had trained for this moment for over a year. They knew exactly what they were doing. The objective was not conquest. Humanity did not want to rule the Vecthari. The objective was destruction. Systematic and complete destruction of everything that had allowed the Dominion to wage war. Military installations were the first targets. The humans advanced through the streets of Kethvar with weapons ready, destroying barracks and armories and command centers. Any Vecthari who raised a weapon against them was killed immediately. Those who did not fight were left alone. The warrior caste of the Dominion could not accept this. They had spent their entire lives training for battle. They had conquered dozens of worlds. They would not simply stand aside while aliens invaded their home. They attacked in waves, charging human positions with primitive courage and absolute determination. They died in waves, cut down by weapons they could not match. General Webb watched these attacks and felt a strange mix of emotions. The Vecthari warriors were brave. He could not deny that. They faced certain death and did not hesitate. In another time and another place, he might have respected them, but they had started this war. They had murdered millions of innocent people. They had tried to enslave his entire species. Respect could wait. Victory could not. The ground campaign spread across the planet over the following weeks. Human forces destroyed every weapons factory, every shipyard, every military academy. They tore down statues of Dominion heroes and burned records of Dominion conquests. They erased 3,000 years of military tradition. Maria Santos arrived on the 23rd day. She had been liberated from New Helsinki when human forces retook the planet. Now she served as a liaison officer, helping coordinate operations between military units. But her real purpose was simpler. She wanted to see. She walked through the ruins of Kethvar and remembered her students. 23 children killed in an instant because the Vecthari thought humanity was weak. 23 futures erased because an alien empire wanted more slaves. She felt no guilt for what was happening here. No sympathy for the Vecthari civilians who watched their world crumble. They had supported the Dominion. They had celebrated its conquests. They had cheered when other species were enslaved and exterminated. Now they would learn what it felt like. On the 40th day, human forces captured the Dominion Council chambers. Most of the council members had fled, but a few remained, too proud or too slow to escape. Among them was a younger high commander who had assumed authority after Kethral's death. Admiral Ellis came down from orbit to oversee the interrogation personally. The new high commander was defiant at first. He spoke of Vecthari honor and Dominion glory. He promised that other fleets in distant galaxies would avenge this defeat. The humans had won a battle, but they would lose the war. Ellis listened to his threats and then showed him the intelligence reports. Those distant fleets had been contacted. Coalition diplomats had reached them with recordings of the battle over Vecthari Prime. They had seen what happened to the homeworld. They had seen the complete destruction of the Dominion's military power. None of them were coming. The fleets in other galaxies were cutting ties with the home world. They were declaring independence and seeking peace with the species they had conquered. The Dominion was collapsing everywhere. Not just here. The High Commander stared at the reports and said nothing. His defiance crumbled into something that might have been despair. The war ended, not with a treaty, but with a broadcast. President Cole addressed the galaxy from the ruins of the Dominion Council chambers. His image was transmitted to every human world, every Vecthari colony, and every species that had been enslaved by the Dominion. He spoke clearly and without emotion. "We did not seek this war," he said. "We offered peace, and they chose violence. We offered coexistence, and they chose conquest. So we gave them what they asked for." He gestured at the destruction surrounding him. The empty streets, and broken buildings, and silent monuments to a fallen empire. "Let every species in this galaxy understand," he continued. "Humanity will never be slaves. We will never surrender. And anyone who threatens our people will share the Vecthari fate." The broadcast ended. The message spread. In the months that followed, a new order emerged from the ashes of the old. The species that had been enslaved by the Dominion formed a coalition with humanity at its center, not because humans demanded leadership but because they had proven themselves worthy of trust. The Vecthari survived, but their power was broken forever. They were confined to their homeworld under permanent human monitoring. Their warriors were disarmed. Their shipyards were dismantled. They would never threaten anyone again. Admiral Ellis retired from active duty. She had given enough of herself to the war. Commander Price, now Admiral Price, assumed command of the peacekeeping fleet that would maintain order in the former Dominion territories. Christopher Hayes returned to training new pilots. He never spoke of his kills or his battles. When young pilots asked about his experiences, he simply told them to focus on their training. The past was past. Maria Santos went back to teaching. Her new classroom was on a liberated world, filled with children from a dozen different species. She taught them history and mathematics, and the importance of standing together against those who would do harm. 20 years after the war, a Vecthari delegation requested an audience with the human ambassador. They wished to discuss the possibility of rejoining the galactic community. They had changed, they said. They had learned. The ambassador was Samuel Price, now elderly but still sharp. He had fought in the war and remembered everything. The Meridian, New Providence, New Helsinki, the millions who had died because the Vecthari thought humanity was weak. He studied the alien representatives for a long moment before speaking. "We will consider your request," he said. "But understand this. We remember everything. We remember every child you killed, every colony you burned. You wanted war with humanity. You received it. If you ever forget that lesson, we will teach it again." The Vecthari bowed their heads in submission. Outside the embassy, human children played in a park. They had never known war. They had grown up in a galaxy where peace was normal and violence was rare. They did not know how close their parents and grandparents had come to extinction. Samuel Price watched them through the window and allowed himself a small smile. This was why they had fought. This was why they had endured the long night and crossed the stars and brought down an empire. Not for revenge or glory or conquest. For them. For the children who would never have to fear slavery or extermination. For the future that the Vecthari had tried to steal. Humanity had paid a terrible price for that future. Millions had died. Worlds had burned. Scars remained that would take generations to heal. But they had won, and they would never let anyone forget it.